So real quick, I'm Randy Friese. I live, of course, in this district. Pam and I represent this district. I'm also a trauma surgeon at the university. I teach students and residents how to be a surgeon. And I got elected in 2014, re-elected in 2016, running for my third term. You want to just briefly introduce yourself? And then we'll
Yeah, I'm Pam Hannley, and I was elected for the first time in 2016, and so I've been in the House for just 2 years, my first term. And I have a background in public health and in medicine, so you're looking at it as far as the medical team and the legislature, and LD9 just happens to have both of us. Lastly, my last major career job was managing editor for the American Journal of Medicine, and I still work there part-time. I'm kind of the institutional memory, so they call me up and say, why did we do it this way? And I said, oh, well, back in 2006, we made this decision. So anyway, I work part-time at the Journal, and I'm proud to serve you all in the legislature, and here we go, we tag team. Here we go.
Yeah, so what I would like to do is just sort of briefly go through the process of how a bill becomes a law. This past session, there were around 400 bills that actually made it to the governor's desk, and he vetoed maybe 20 or 30 of them, so there was about 370 some new laws this year. Most of them are little tweaks and corrections to things that needed to be tweaked or corrected. Some of them are brand new ideas. Bills get introduced by the members, right? Each member can introduce as many bills as they like, and then certain deadlines do come into play as the session moves forward. Bills can be introduced through members by agencies, like the Department of Education might need a tweak on something that they recognize, so the Department of Corrections or the Department of Economic Security. They'll go to a member and say, we need this changed, help us change it. A lobbyist can come to a member and say, the people I represent would like to have this bill done, or this change done, or this idea introduced. And if a member agrees, they can introduce that idea. Or the member themselves might have an idea, and they want to introduce that to the bodies and see if that bill can pass and make its way through. So what happens is a bill gets introduced into either the Senate or the House, and then the Speaker of the House is the person in charge of the agendas and things, would then assign that bill, or the President of the Senate on the Senate side would then assign that bill to a committee. So right there is your first hurdle that a bill must get over, and that shows you the power, the authority the Speaker and the President have on things that move forward. If I introduce a bill in the House, we're both House members, so we would introduce the bills in the House. If the Speaker goes, I don't care for this bill, they can put it aside, and it's dead. It has to be assigned to a committee to move forward. So, if you notice your bill's not getting assigned, you go to the Speaker and say, why are you assigning this bill? It's a priority for me, I really think it's important, this is why it should work, this is who it will help, and you try to sort of get them to understand the importance of it. But if they don't like it, it's done. Now there are certain, pardon?
Couldn't they table it?
Yes, they totally don't sign it to a committee. It's considered tabled, or if you will, the circular file. Same thing on the President's side. The President of the Senate can do the same thing. So then once a bill gets assigned to a committee, let's say on the House side, the Speaker says, okay, I don't mind this bill, I'll assign it to a committee. There's one of anywhere from 12 to 19 committees. Every time the legislature is re-elected every 2 years, everything's restructured. And it's usually very similar, but the committee number either shrinks a little or grows a little bit. That bill gets assigned to the committee. Now the chairperson is in possession of that bill, the chairperson of that committee. Now that person has the authority to say, I like this bill, I'm going to put it on an agenda, and the committee will vote on it. Or that chairperson may go, I don't like this bill, I don't agree with its ideas or what it's trying to do. There's another hurdle, another person who can simply circular file the bill or table the bill, and it doesn't go anywhere. So you have to get through the Speaker, the President, through the committee chair, get your bill onto an agenda, and then it has to pass out of committee on a majority vote. So if there's 9 people on a committee, it needs to have 5 votes to get out of committee. And the committee is where you or anyone in the community can weigh in on a bill idea. You can come up and testify and say, this bill is a great idea because, or really this bill is going to hurt people because. So you can come up and testify, you can sign in online and use the request to speak system. You want to talk about that real quick?
Yeah, I was going to say, you guys have a big role in this, because even if, like for example, a few years ago when Victoria Steele was trying to get Andy Tobin to hear the Equal Rights Amendment, or at least assign it to committee, he was going to put it in his pocket and forget about it, but there were a whole lot of people, especially in Tucson, who said, no, we want you to at least assign it to a committee. So he did eventually assign it to a committee. So at each one of these roadblocks, the President of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, or the committee chairman, you guys can write to them, you can call them, because you can push them along. You can definitely push them along. But like he said, once it gets to once it's on a committee agenda, that's when you guys really have a lot of power, because the request to speak system is something where you can log on and you can do an up or down, a yay or a nay on the bill, but you can also type in what your opinion is, who this is going to help or who this is going to hurt, and why you like it or don't like it, and then that becomes part of the record, basically. So that always sticks with that bill. Yeah.
How do you know when it gets sent to a committee?
Well, see, that's the tricky part. Now, in this past legislature, Speaker Mesnard said that the committee agendas had to be, it was like 4 days before, they had to release the agenda, 4 days before the committee meeting, and they were not allowed to put things on at the last minute. Now, the trick that we used to play in the past was that they would put things on the agenda like just hours before the committee meeting, and so then nobody knew, and it was really hard to figure it out. But if there's like certain committees or certain bills that you want to follow, the committees always meet on the same day, like 9 o'clock on Monday or whatever, and so you kind of to get into the groove. Okay, if their agenda's out 4 days in advance, let's see what's on there. There's also people who put out notices. The Arizona Advocacy Network puts out notices. I think some of the women's group puts out notices. I put notices out if there's something on I'm on the Banking Insurance Committee and on the Health Committee, and especially banking and insurance. We hear a lot of bills that are not necessarily good for the people of Arizona. So if I know something's going to be bad that I want you guys to comment on, I'll put it on my Facebook page, or I'll put an email out and say, hey, you ought to take a look at this. You know, we had a bill to allow risky investments of ASRS pension funds. And, you know, I have a lot of retirees, and I don't think that you guys want them messing around with ASRS. It's one of the only stable retirement systems we have left in the state of Arizona. So that was one where we really tried to get people to comment. So your comments mean a lot. When we are debating a bill in committee or on the House floor, we'll often look up request to speak. And like some bills, you know, there's like maybe 5 corporations who want it, and then there's hundreds of people who have signed in on request to speak saying, hey, this isn't a good idea. So it gives us a hint on what to look for. Yeah.
Is there a specific number that people could speak?
You mean if you wanted to come and speak?
Yeah, how many people?
Yeah.
As many as the chair, so the chairman is in charge of the committee. So if somebody signs in, it's custom to allow everyone time to speak. So that we've had bills where hundreds of people signed in to
That's what I was
speak.
interested in.
Yes.
Now the chairman might say, I'm limiting everyone to 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But everyone that signed in is customarily given an opportunity to speak. As far as getting an idea of what bill's been assigned to the committee, you can go to azleg.gov. And if you know the bill number, you can search that bill number and see what progress is, where it is in the system. If it's been assigned to committee, it comes up assigned to education. And then if it's been agended, you'll see Education Committee agenda on September or whatever, or it wouldn't be September, but you know, January or February, whatever. So there's a way to follow it.
Yeah.
You gotta know the number of the
You
bill.
gotta know
If
the
you
number.
How do you find the number? Same way online?
You can look online if you know the bill's sponsor. If you know that Representative Powers Hannley has a bill you're interested in, you can click on her name, and then you can see all the bills that she sponsored. You get the bill number. Or if you know which representative has, you know, you can search it that way.
Yeah.
How about
If you're
amendments?
interested in more, we've been thinking about doing a workshop, probably in November, on the request to speak system.
Yeah.
And on websites that track the bills and give you a heads up when they're gonna be heard, by which committee, and what the bill number is.
Yes.
So,
Can you hear Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah, at any
Can
rate,
you,
probably around November. I'd like to get as close to the next session as we can.
Yes.
That's a
so
good
it's
idea.
fresh. But,
how about
we
amendments?
can't do December because we're inundated with choirs and bell ringers and.
We got a question. We have a question in the back about amendments,
Could it
right?
be amendments?
Yes. So amendments are a little trickier. The amendments come in 2 places. You can either have a committee amendment. Amendments for every committee have a deadline, and they must be posted and made public 48 hours before the committee starts. So you'll see them online, except for Appropriations Committee can have amendments without deadline. So you can drop an amendment right in committee, you can do a verbal amendment. So that, at least that's the way it was for this past year, 2 years. It might change with the new legislature and the new chairman. But in general, Appropriations Committee allows amendments without deadlines.
And could you discuss it a part of the bill?
I'm sorry to say that
Could
again.
you discuss it part of the bill, or does it have an additional amendment?
So amendments are limited to two, you can only have an amendment to the bill, and then you can only have an amendment to an amendment. And that's it. You can't go any further than that. So amendments can also be introduced in what's called committee of the whole, and that's sort of the next step in the process. So once a bill gets through a committee with a majority vote, it can either be amended or unamended, or, you know, so do pass amendment or do pass is what you'll see. DP or DPA. Do pass means it's come out of the committee without amendments. Do pass amended or DPA means it's come out of committee with an amendment. Now it has to go to what's called committee of the whole. So in the House, that's all 60 of us get together and debate, ask questions, and consider each bill that's come from committee. We can strip amendments off in the committee of the whole. We can add new amendments on. So in the committee of the whole, we have an opportunity to introduce new amendments. So the speaker, now back to the speaker and the president, something comes out of committee. And then the speaker and the president can go, you know what, I signed this committee, but I don't like it. So what they do now is don't put it on a committee of the whole agenda. So they have another opportunity to stop something. Right? So then, if it gets put on a committee of the whole agenda, again, we have an amendment deadline that is usually like the night before or the day before the committee of the whole, but not infrequently the speaker will waive or extend those deadlines, and amendments come minutes before we discuss a bill. That happens. And that's unfortunate. And some amendments can be quite substantive, if that's the right word, and change things greatly.
It could be
And
20, 30 pages long sometimes.
what was that
Oh, we
bill?
have a length.
Who's the speaker now, and do you get a new one every year?
Every 2 years,
Every 2
when we
years.
have an election, the body gets together and votes for a new speaker. Now, usually the speaker is elected with the majority of the majority. The speaker is elected by the entire House members by majority vote. But what happens is the Republicans have been a majority for 30 years. They just get 31 of their 35 colleagues to vote for them, and now they're speaker. Right? So the minority has played little role in speaker selection.
Can the you said the Republicans, could the Democrats vote for the speaker?
We could, but we usually don't have to because they get their 31 votes, right? And there's 60 House members, and there's 35 Republicans. They just come together with an agreement with 31 people. This person, she or he, will be speaker, and then they make their deals with, and I'll be committee chair of this and that, so I'll vote for you if you know.
Yeah.
So Democrats generally don't participate in that. We could. The way they run it is they haven't. They feel that they need, if they elected a speaker with a Democratic vote, they would be unhappy.
Well, and so they're already sort of lining up who's going to be the next speaker, you know.
They don't realize that they're going to lose the majority this time.
Yeah. So we want him to be the speaker, right?
Yeah, and we better be friends with the speaker.
Yeah, there you go.
Can you tell us about a striker?
And there's
Yes.
no,
Oh, yes, the
and
striker.
there's no minority position, is that?
Well, the minority then has their own leadership. I was the assistant House minority leader, so that meaning that I and the leader and the third leadership position is called the whip. We would meet with the speaker and the Republican majority and bring up issues like, why are you bullying my people on the floor, not letting them speak? Or why is it that this particular person, this committee is not being treated properly? And they would, okay, so this past 2 years ago, we had a lot of teachers coming to, and parents coming to give speeches. And so he said, they can't give speeches, they can't be floor guests. So we started reading their letters. And he said, you gotta stop that. And we said, no, we're not stopping this. This is our voice. And this is the only voice we have. We can't push our legislature through, so we're gonna tell you what these people are hearing. And then mostly about vouchers. That was to save our schools, parents and teachers coming to give us speeches about why vouchers are bad. And the Republican leadership was pushing us to stop. You guys are wasting our time. He even, remember, changed the rules and started making our, we do what's called a point of personal privilege, usually at the opening of the floor every day. He moved that to the end of the day.
Hoping that the audience would leave,
go,
you
yeah.
know.
But anyway, and I'll get to the striker, yes.
Yes, is there, you mentioned the various deadlines or time limits. They'll say, you say 4 days before it goes into committee or gets on the agenda or whatever. Who determines that, and is there any way to get a guaranteed time? Say it has to be 7 days before.
So those rules are set up in the House rules. And the Senate has rules. So the Senate has rules for its chamber and members, the House has our own rules. They're not the same, they're very similar, they're not the same. And those rules are set forth in that House rules, and every new legislature, so we're in the 53rd legislature now. After November, starting in January, that'll be the 54th legislature. Every new legislature, so every 2-year period, you accept and adopt those rules. Sometimes we make small changes. This year, we actually adopted rules and added a rule or two about sexual harassment because of the issues we had with that one particular member. So every year, usually we adopt the same rules and tweak a little bit here and there or add 1 or 2 new rules, but it's pretty much standard. But remember, at any time, every rule can be waived by a majority vote. So if they got 31 members, 31 Republican members in the majority who say, we'll waive the rules today, everything's gone out the window. And that happens not infrequently.
It does.
So, Tom asked about strike. So, there's something called a strike everything amendment, which is a very important tool when you look at the reason it was designed. The reason the strike everything, so what a strike everything amendment does is it takes a bill that's sitting in front of a committee. It has to be a bill assigned to a committee on the agenda, and then someone could offer an amendment that strikes everything after the enacting clause, which is like the same words on every bill, and changes it to something completely different, right? So now you can have a bill that had to do with keeping your dog on your leash, can turn into a bill about money for Department of Economic Security, or a bill about making sure that you take away photo radar and turn it into a bill about expanding guns everywhere.
Yeah. But strikers also can be used for good.
Yes.
So like this year we saw strikers being used for good because we had, for 2 years we've had a big fight about trying to expand dental scope of practice and to add dental therapy to dentistry, so that adds a mid-level person in between the dentist and the dental hygienist. And so if you have a simple procedure, you could get it done by a dental therapist. Well, it had died in the Sunrise application in 2016, and then passed in 2017 with a big 5-hour fight, but then died in the House Health Committee because we had very powerful Republicans in the House Health Committee who did not want dental therapy passed. So then it was dead, basically. And then what happened, I think it was on the very last day, dental therapy came back from the Senate as a striker. And so a lot of people knew that if it actually got so everybody could vote on it, it would pass. And so it passed, handily on the last day as a striker. So generally, strikers are used for evil, but this time it was used for good. So, it gives us flexibility at the end.
It was designed, the striker was designed in the rules as a tool, like Pam described, to extend the life of something that's not quite ready for a full vote. And then if we get past deadlines, you can bring it back as a striker, work on it, negotiate, change it, bring it as a... So it has a good intention. However, more commonly it's used to trick and complicate.
Yes.
So here's an example of a trick. We had a bill. We were at the near end of the session. The last committee to hear new bills is the Appropriations Committee, and in both House and Senate. And it was the last time a committee was going to meet outside of the budget, right? And lots of strikers come in because they have these ideas that are bad. They want to keep them in the shadows, and they know that light has to shine on them at some point. So they want to hold that light away as far as they can. So we had a bill that would allow businesses to build a building for a charter school or donate hundreds of thousands of dollars to a charter school, and in exchange, the charter school must give preference to the children of the employees and administrators of that business. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Right? And they hold it to the very end. And I said to them, I sit on the Appropriations Committee, I said, why is this coming to light now? Oh, we just thought of it. Oh, I was like, no, I don't think so, right? So, yeah, that's the striker. Now, remember, a striker can only be done in committee. You cannot strike a bill on the floor. So once a bill makes it to committee whole, it can't be stricken and changed drastically. But it can happen. It can happen. It usually happens frequently in the last week of the House bills moving in the House. So here's another tidbit. So all the bills that are heard in the House in the first 5 to 6 weeks of session, right? Whatever passes out of the House must go to the Senate. They must then start all over again in the Senate. So most bills get 2 public hearings, one in the House, one in the chamber of origin, either House or Senate, and then they cross and they get another one. Another trick with the striker is to strike a bill that passed the House that had innocuous, right? Everybody needs to wear their seatbelt or something. You know, everybody votes yes. It comes out of the House with 60 votes yes, 0 no's. Goes over to the Senate. They strike it with something horrible, and now they only get 1 hearing over in the Senate. So it can be used as a trick. It's complicated, but once things then pass out of committee of the whole and the Senate and the House, if we change it, it's got to go back to if the Senate sends us a bill and we change it, it's got to go back to the Senate. They got to vote on it a last time and accept those changes.
And it gets really confusing.
Yeah.
It gets really confusing, especially if there's some bills that will be put on the agenda and then taken off the agenda, and they go off and on because they don't think that they have the votes to pass it, right? So they'll pull it back, they'll amend it somehow, they'll tweak it, they'll add strikers, and you'll get all, so some bills, I mean, you get like a ton of paper on your desk, and it's like, wait, where did all these things come from? And, what are we voting on? Is this the striker? Is it the real bill? And which amendment? And so it's purposefully confusing, I think, at the end, in order to try to trick people.
So after a bill comes out of committee of the whole, then we do what's called third read. Okay, so this is kind of traditional. So
Old-fashioned.
yeah. So in the House and Senate, every bill that's being considered by the members must be read aloud on the floor 3 times.
The whole bill?
No.
Good question. So why do you think in 1912, when we wrote the Constitution of Arizona, for Arizona, why do you think they put in there that every bill must be read aloud on the House and Senate floor 3 times?
Yeah, the illiterate people.
Not everybody could read. That's exactly right. There were a lot of elected members that could not read. So they had the opportunity to sit there and listen to the bill and understand it and figure out how they're going to vote on it. Now what we do to get around that is we fast read things. So the reader, you can't. It's nothing. So basically we're adhering to the letter of the law but not to the spirit of the law to save time.
Yeah, if you ever watch the video, I used to be one of those people who would watch the videos. All of the committees and all of the debates and everything is on video, and you guys can watch it in real time and things like that. I was one of those nerds that used to watch these things, and I would hear that guy go, and I was like, what is this? And I didn't get it until I was there. And there was actually one time towards the end of this session where one of the young women, one of the young pages, had to do the fast reader because the regular guy wasn't there. And I think it was either Mesnard or Shope said, wait, I could understand a few of those words. You need to practice more, So you had your hand up.
Don't you have I heard at one time that you have a staff, at least this was in Congress, who will read the bill and give you the important parts that you might want to know. You don't necessarily really read the whole bill. You know what's important.
We have great staff people. Now, I've heard that the Republicans have more staff than we do, but we have really good staff members, and we have designated people who work with each committee. It's like, for example, with the Banking and Insurance Committee, we have lots of really super complicated bills because they're written by insurance companies, right? So they're complicated right from the beginning. So there's 3 women who were serving on the Banking Committee, and then we had these couple of staff members and an intern who would help us sort through them, or we would see things that we think, well, this seems like a trick. Like, for example, in 2017, they wanted to pass this law that said, how when you get an insurance contract, it's usually big and long, right? And there's like an executive summary on the front. So they wanted to pass a law that said the executive summary was not legally binding. So the only part that you probably read wouldn't be enforced. It's not legally binding. So we were able to kill that, But, we read these bills thoroughly, but then we have the staff people will say, like, well, I have a question about this. And then the staff people will follow up with lobbyists or industry people or constituents, so they'll help us dig around, because we have just those few days before the committee to figure out what's going on with this bill and put together our arguments or say, okay, this is fine, But yes, our staff members are awesome.
So frequently we end up reading every bill that is in front of you in your committee. Then we'll read any controversial bill that, that our stakeholders are saying this is a problem. and we depend on each other, like
Yeah.
Pam's on the health committee, the banking insurance. I don't read every banking insurance bill, I'll go to Pam and say, what does this bill do, help me understand?
Yes,
And then we'll get each other up to speed. And then
Then-
our staff, same thing, will help, they read every bill that's their committee. We also have interns, every year, there's interns from U of A, ASU, different colleges that spend the entire session with us. And they get assigned to a committee, and their job is to gather information and keep us informed.
I have a question about when you vote to accept the rules of the House or Senate. Is that a place where you can change some of these under the table fast?
Yeah, so,
Fast hand
yes,
stuff?
yes, but remember,
But we're not.
any member can propose a rule change. In fact, I proposed a rule change that had to do with sexual harassment, and it got on because it was something I arranged with the speaker. So, so if we propose a rule change to make it more difficult for somebody to slip an amendment in by extending making the deadline longer, the majority has to approve it. So every rule change must be a majority vote, 31. And if we only have 25 of us, without their help, we can't get a rule change. And a rule change is something that, even if they agreed with us, they wouldn't do it. It's just so sad, because they just were like, if we could get 6 Republicans who say, I think that's a good idea, rule change, but I can't do it because I will pay a price. The speaker would then hold my bills.
Yeah.
And so there's this retribution within the majority.
And we've seen that on the floor also. Like, for example, Representative Todd Clodfelter, who's on the other side of Speedway, there was one, I don't remember what vote it was, but he voted against the Republican majority.
Probably the ESA.
I don't know, no, it was this year, it was 2018. And literally, the majority leader, John Allen, and the Speaker of the House came and stood like this, right above his desk, and looked down at him like, what the heck do you think you just did? I mean, and he would just, and so, I mean, it's very public, and, they keep their members in line, whereas we're a little more open to differences of opinion, I guess.
It's very different being in the minority than being in the majority, right? And when we're in the majority, we have some lessons to learn. But you know what? I told a reporter this the other day, they have a lot to learn about what it means to be in the minority. So, because it's very different.
Ready for them to learn that. We're gonna teach them.
Can't we sometime have legislators that have some integrity?
Yeah. Well, I appreciated some of the rule changes that Mesnard did make
Yes.
this time, because he was the one who said, you have to have your committee agendas out 4 days in advance, and you can't add a bill right at the end, I mean, they would literally add like maybe 10 bills an hour before, a committee before. And we get some bills where you read this bill and it's like nothing. You think, what is this? And it's one that they're using as a vehicle. They're going to pass this easily, like he said earlier, and then if they need it, they're going to use it as a striker. So in the Senate, their strikers didn't have to be germane, which probably was what helped the therapy, but in the House they did. So there were some things that were better. Also, Mesnard didn't leave the board open forever. Previous speakers would leave the board open for hours while they twisted arms to get something passed. He didn't do that.
I will say that 2 speakers, I had Mr. Gowan my first term, 2014 to 2016, Mr. Mesnard my second term. Mr. Mesnard was a much more fair speaker. He actually listened to us. Let's say, he heard us, but he didn't really listen and do anything that we asked for. But that's a step in the better direction.
I mean, from the stories, nobody liked the way it was run before.
Oh,
Even
sure.
the Republicans
Oh,
didn't
it was
like
a
the way it was
free-for-all
run.
before.
Yeah, so this was much more controlled and orderly, and God knows what we get.
So, and remember, the bill has to come out of the House and Senate and be exactly the same before it goes to the governor's desk. And there's another trick that the majority can do that allows them as maximal amount of time to push an idea through. And this was used on the voucher bill. So basically, is you introduce the bill in the Senate and the House with exactly the same language. So as that bill moves from committee, if somebody amends it over here, they amend it over here. Same language. It moves to the floor. If it's amended here, it's also amended here. It's the exact same language. So all you have to do is so it still gets 2 hearings. It gets a hearing on each side, but it's exactly the same. So if something passes out of the House to the, Cal and Senate Cal, and it goes to third read, and it's exactly the same language in the House and the Senate for third read. What you do is you swap one of them. So the House then votes on the Senate bill votes on the Senate bill, and it goes to the governor immediately. So it allows you to use the entire 90-day, 100-day session to push something through, and that's what they did with vouchers. They introduced exactly the same language, they held on to it, and they twisted because we were told that there was not enough votes in the House to pass vouchers, and they used the entire 3 months to twist and thumb screw and, whatever, and then bam, it was done and they passed it.
Yeah.
Does the governor ever veto things?
Yes, oh yes, he vetoed like 20 or 30 bills this year.
But
He
they took some of them back.
He vetoed 10 bills in spite this year.
Yeah.
We had, right before, as we were doing, and the budget is another example of the mirror, we call that mirror language. The budget every year is done the same way with mirror language. And every amendment is pre-approved, so the budget is a dead document when it hits the House and Senate floor. It cannot be changed because everything's pre-agreed. So we introduce a lot of amendments that have great ideas, and our colleagues go, well, that's a great idea, but I can't vote for it because it's not pre-approved. And it fails.
Spite vetoes.
Oh, vetoes, the spite vetoes. So we were working on the budget, and the governor, remember, was initially saying there's no money for teacher raises, and suddenly he must have done a poll, and he said, I found money for teacher raises, right? So we sent him like 10 bills right before that, and he vetoed them all and said, send me my budget with my teacher raises. So, then what happened was, we worked on the budget, they made a promise, I guess, to send the budget, so we then waived the rules, because these bills are now vetoed. They no longer are in the system. So we waived all the rules for late introduction bills, introduced all those 17 bills late, waived all the rules for committee, they didn't have to go back to committee, and we voted on them again, and then he signed them.
In order to get their.
It's about a friend.
I know.
So that's the system. We could go over a specific example or two if you want.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so we had some wins this
Yeah, we
year,
had some
you
serious
know.
wins.
I mean, there's like a buzz around town that if you're a Democrat and you don't get a bill passed, no matter how little it is, that you didn't do anything. But there were a lot of things that were passed this year that were good. And in fact, in some ways, I think we peaked in the first week with the opioid bill and went downhill from there. And so that was one that was a bipartisan bill. And again, us being the only two medical people up there, we were both on the Democratic team that helped negotiate those ideas for the opioid bill with the governor's team and with the Republicans. And so, you know, after it was done, we're all like, why can't we do the budget like this, you know? And so they did incorporate good, solid public health measures, you know, like the Good Samaritan 911 bill, that if you're in an overdose situation, you can call for help and get help and not get arrested, or the Angel Initiative, which you can take your drugs into a designated location and say, I'm done, help me, I don't want to be a drug addict anymore, and not get arrested but still get help. There's the brief intervention. If you're in the hospital and you have an overdose and you don't die, then they'll do an intervention saying, hey, you didn't die this time, maybe you should quit. You know, they do that with cigarette smokers, and they do that with other drug addicts. Alcohol abuse, yes. And so there were a lot of good things that were incorporated in that. It's not going to solve all the problems, but it's a really good first start, and it was based on solid public health practices. The other one, like I said earlier, I think dental therapy was a big win, because it was a big fight because the dentists didn't want this, right? And so what we finally ended up negotiating with the dentist was that dental therapy would be available in like community health centers like El Rio. El Rio was like ready to go to start dental therapy. And then also on the Native American lands and the tribal lands, because they have a huge problem with tooth loss out there. So to have this dental therapist who could be like a health educator also, and go to the remote areas and go to the schools and, you know, do screening and talk about brushing your teeth and start young with the children. And there was a telemedicine component in it too. So if they're out there in Tuba City and they see a kid that's mouth is a mess, they can take a picture and send it back to the community health center or to Indian Health and say, hey, what do you think? And the dentist there can say, give that kid a toothbrush and show him how to use it, or tell his parents he needs an appointment and he needs to come in for work, you know. So that's good for access to care. It's going to lower costs for people. And so those were two big wins as far as, you know, medicine are concerned. We also, with the Red for Ed movement, one of their big issues was to stop the tax giveaways until the schools are paid for. And so that became a platform for the House Democrats, and we didn't 100% stick to it, but most of us did. And so, because we were really looking at where is the money going in Arizona. And so if you look at the scheduled corporate tax cuts, in the Tea Party, when the Tea Party started in 2011, it was $100 million in their corporate tax cuts in 2011. We have another visitor. But by 2017, that was $1 billion in corporate tax cuts. And so what do we owe the schools? We owe the schools about $1 billion, so that's where the money is. And so we really pushed for, working with Red for Ed, and it was amazing. And that, I'm wearing red today because it was suggested we wear red every Wednesday to remember that fight, and I think it's important, and so we don't have all the money in the world. We're giving away $13 billion and we're using $10 billion to run the state, and so at some point we have to say, wait, let's take care of the things that the people really want, like education, protecting your pensions, protecting Social Security, giving medical care to the people who need it, because I've said this many times, it doesn't do our community, our state, or our country any good to allow people to live in poverty and sickness. We're either going to help them up front, or we're going to pay for it in the end. And paying for it after they get sick, or they get stuck in jail is a whole lot more expensive than helping them out when they're little kids or when they're seniors to stay healthy and stay financially stable, so.
Pam mentioned the opioid bill, the dental therapy bill. Those are great bills. We had another win, I think. So there's a couple ways to get, to mark your successes, right, as a legislator. The first, as Pam mentioned, is to get a bill passed. If you can get your bill through the House, through the Senate, on the governor's desk, and have them sign it, that happens about 1% of the time, right? 400 bills hit the governor's desk, maybe 2% of the time. And 400 bills hit the governor's desk, 8 of them are Democratic. And a lot of time there are things like a holiday, or I actually got a bill passed that had to do with parking, a sticker for veterinarian tags and an alternative fuel sticker.
Not veterinarian.
I'm sorry, veterans. I am a veteran, a veteran's tag, and an alternative fuel vehicle on an electric car. So, but the other way, so that's a hard way, and that's a difficult way, and the other way is to get your bill amended onto a Republican's bill, and then get you vote for it, get your Democratic friends to vote for it. So that happens a lot. And then the best way is to negotiate with a Republican bill sponsor and get them to move from their original position to a compromise position, and then you can vote for it and get your colleagues to vote for it. And we did that this year several times. One very specific example is the Republican sponsor created a fee that the Department of Transportation director would assign to every vehicle license registration. So you pay your tax and you register your vehicle. They're going to assign a fee, which ended up being $18 for every registration. And that fee then goes to pay for Highway Patrol. Because Highway Patrol has been paid for the last several years out of our state funds for highway maintenance.
Oh,
and we've not been able to, we've not been able to pay for our state highway maintenance. So because we've been paying for Highway Patrol. So now this fee generated $150 million, which will pay for Highway Patrol. Now our the federal government sends us monies for state highways, and we'll be able to use that for maintenance for the first time in several years. But coupled with that, what he did was he wanted to eliminate the vehicle registration tax for alternative fuel vehicles. There's a formula, and if you have an electric car, you only pay 1%, that 1% of the value of your car is reflected in that formula. If you have a standard fuel vehicle, it's 60% of the car's value is reflected in that formula. And this particular sponsor wanted to eliminate that and make it from 1% to 60% and reduce the incentive to have an electric vehicle. So I told him, no, I can't get my caucus behind this. I love this idea about saving this HERF money and paying for the highways and this fee that pays for Highway Patrol, but I can't, no, we need to incentivize electric vehicles. So he and I negotiated and we got to 30%, and we said, okay, let's do it. So we were able to save half of that reduction, and that bill passed with bipartisan support, and now is enacted, and will help our roads.
when, sometimes we can get rid of stuff just by debating, like the eye movement bill.
Yeah.
There was a
That's a great
bill
example.
that was, it started in the Senate, right? Because I think the first time I saw it was when we were in caucus, you know, and Dr. Friese runs the caucus meetings, and he sits way in the back, and I come a little bit late, and I was always in the front, and I'm always raising my hand, you know, and look, see if he sees me. And I said, eye movement testing, what is this, you know? So this bill was a new technology, and the bill was to put this new technology